Hey, welcome back to the Runaround here on ESPN 1300. I'm Brad Jager, joined by Ryan McGrath, and Greg Jubb is missing in action. Brought to you by Halliburton Sports, the only show dedicated to runners and endurance athletes. If you want great customer service for all your running needs, check them out at halliburtonsports.com. Once again, that's Halliburton Sports at halliburtonsports.com. Got a little something different for people today. John Dye is a native of Maryland. He started a website back in 1995 called DyeStat.com. It's basically for Western Maryland coaches and became the internet home of track and field in the United States. If you're anybody that loves high school track and field, you've seen DyeStat. It's gone through a couple transformations over the past couple of years, and this last one hasn't been the most pleasant, and John's probably going to tell us about that. So let's welcome to the Runaround, John Dye.
Hi.
How do you do?
Hey, John, how's it going?
I'm good.
Good. What's new? Anything?
Well, I think you just put your finger on it.
Yeah. So give us a little bit of a history of your website, how you started it, why you started it.
Well, I was a general sports fan that's sitting at home until my son, Derek, came home from school one day and said that he's going out for the track team at Middletown High School. And I decided to take a look, and following year, my daughter went out for the team for pole vault. My son was a high jumper. And as you mentioned, we started in Western Maryland. My motivation was to keep track of my kids' competition. And so the first thing I did was a Monday morning newsletter to 20 coaches in the 5 counties of Western Maryland. And I got them to give me $25 for the season to give them a Monday report of results and rankings in that area. So as my kids got better, my area of interest grew wider. And in 97, they both won the Maryland State meet in their events, high jump and pole vault. So now I wanted to know how they compared nationally. So I went out and got all the state meet results for the 50 states in girls pole vault, boys high jump, and found out my son was in the 80s and my daughter was in the 40s. So the next year I decided I'll do national rankings and I'll go 100 deep to make sure my kids are in it. And that was what sort of started we started going to national meets and so on and doing national coverage, and that's how DyeStat.com got to be well known all over the country.
One thing begat another, and it just kept blooming and blooming and blooming. Did you ever think it was going to get this big and this popular?
I never even had a plan. I mean, this is just sort of a home hobby that went berserk.
Yeah.
And I think for our listeners out there, if you're not familiar with DyeStat, I was in high school in the 1990s, in the mid 90s. And everybody remembers what the internet was like. You had a dial-up modem, the screechy noise, and everything was really slow. And as far as race results, you just didn't see them. They were generally printed in the newspaper and oftentimes a week late or buried pretty deep. DyeStat.com revolutionized how we found out about information outside of our own areas. I mean, it was absolutely unbelievable to have this at your fingertips. And, going into college, even in the late 90s, John, I was actually a teammate of your daughter's at University of Maryland. And, you still didn't even have any other sites that could compare. This was the site to go to.
Well, that's true. And, it was the timing was such that with the internet just starting, the World Wide Web was really just getting in its infancy in 1996. And I had already run a website for the U.S. government. I worked for the Inspector Generals of Small Business Administration, and so I knew how to do that. And so it was just fortunate that you could. There's no barriers to entry like there is in publishing a magazine or a newspaper. $20 a month, you could have a website, and so that's what allowed DyeStat to become something. And then the other thing is that kids around the country up until then really didn't know what was going on outside their own little area. And until there was some limited national news and track and field news, but that comes out about 6 weeks late. So being able to have next day results on the internet was just, as you say, revolutionized the whole idea and created a national community of high school track. I mean, kids started communicating and being aware of what was going on everywhere in the country. So,
do you think that's necessarily been good for the sport?
Well, there's a whole lot of people that credit the internet in terms of high school DISTAT for stimulating the revival of distance running in the U.S., starting with the big three of Alan Webb, Dathan Ritzenhein, and Ryan Hall in 2001. And those guys and several magazine articles have given credit to the internet and primarily DISTAT for getting that started. And of course, in this year's Olympics, you see the fruits of that with Ryan Hall and Ritzenhein and Galen Rupp, Jenny Behringer. We're getting medals in the events that we hadn't for years and years and years.
Yeah. Now let's talk a little bit what's been going on with the site lately, as much as you can talk about it. For a long time, it was your site, distat.com, and then you sold it to Scholastic Sports?
Student Sports.
Student Sports.
Yeah.
And from there, Student Sports sold it to ESPN.
That's correct.
Okay.
Student Sports had a number of activities. DISTAT was just one. And when ESPN decided 4 years ago to have a high school initiative, they were looking for activities, events, and websites in 10 or 12 sports. And so they bought Student Sports, which included DISTAT, and we became the track and cross country portion of the ESPN high school websites. That happened 4 years ago. And then last June, ESPN announced that the experiment wasn't going well, and so they were closing it down.
Well, that's unfortunate. There was still a lot of people, even though the site had changed a lot once it went to ESPN, in the way it looked and just the feel. I think everybody gets comfortable with something, and when you make even a minor change, a lot of people get up in arms about that. So what's going to happen now?
Well, that's a $64 question for me and the other people working on DISTAT. We're trying to find a new platform, but at this point, that hasn't happened. So we're still working on that, and I'm not sure.
Now, there's a lot of other sites out there, FlowTrack, MileSplit, even our site, runningmaryland.com, that's been doing the same sort of thing in different variations. Do you think you might, when you come back, that you might have to change the site a little bit to just to grab a different crowd?
Oh, I think definitely. When we started, it was edition, so we had no competition. There was a new vehicle, a low-cost vehicle for distribution. And track and field is one thing I've always said, that is that track and field has a couple characteristics that made my site a winner. One is that the performances in track and field are quantitative and objective, and so it's unlike football and basketball, where if a kid throws 30 touchdowns in a game in Illinois, you have no idea whether that's really good or not versus a kid in another state, because you don't know what the competition is, what the style of offense, whether they throw the ball every down, all these kind of things. In track and field, how high, how far, how fast is an objective measure that is comparable no matter where it was run. And if a kid can jump 7 feet in Maryland, he can jump 7 feet in California, and the kid in California in Nebraska knows what he's up against in terms of those guys. And same thing on running events. So there's that. And then the other thing is that track and field is unappreciated at the local level. Almost all track and field athletes that I talk to feel like that they don't get as much recognition as football and basketball kids. And I don't know how many kids around the country have told me back in the heyday of DISTAT, that they got more publicity on DISTAT than they did on their local newspapers.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the reasons Running Maryland was started up, was because where I came from in Bergen County, New Jersey, they used to cover track and field ridiculously. Every league meet had their results in the paper. And the Bergen Evening Record did a great job up there. And then all of a sudden, when that started going away, nobody knew what was going on, especially here in Maryland, more than the Baltimore Sun just kind of gave up on it. So, I mean, it's a great feeling to know that, you know, it must be a great feeling for you to know that you've really helped bring the sport to the forefront again. Just to let people know, we're talking to John Dye here of DyeStat.com. And if you got a question for John, give us a call at 410-481-1300. Go ahead, John. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Well, back to your original question of what we would do differently now. I mean, those conditions that were so favorable in the late 90s, you know, are a lot different now. I mean, every meet almost has its own website and puts up results. And if they don't, there's a site like Running Maryland or Mile Split that will. There's video available from Flow Track and Runner Space and Mile Split on a lot of meets all over the country. So, and then the whole thing of social media has sort of undercut the value of message boards, which were a big part of DyeStat. I mean, our Track Talk forum was 40% of our page views.
Right.
And 24/7, there was somebody in there. I mean, I could log on at 2 a.m. in the morning, there'd be 150 people in there. And that sort of created a community that, you know, was sort of blown to smithereens when they decided to close it down. And but some people think message boards aren't the primary thing anymore with all the social media interactions and ways of communicating, so with Facebook and so on and so forth. So I think the one thing we'd have to do now is to get more user-generated content and more take advantage of social media and get instead of relying on the message board to generate the community.
Well, we were just talking before the show, John, about you know, a lot of the things that existed in the 90s that really resurrected running. Your site being one of them. We were talking about Mark Bloom's Harrier report. You know, we were talking about. I'm also from New Jersey, so Ed Grant had the Scullion site. Ed Grant. Yeah. Ed Grant's a fantastic guru that I met my first national championship meet down in Raleigh, North Carolina. So.
He used to type up a 16, 18-page newsletter once a month on a typewriter in different columns and photocopy and mail it out to everybody. It was amazing the work that guy did.
Oh, he's amazing. I mean, he's 85 years old, I think, or thereabouts, and he'll still rip off times and distances from meets 20, 30 years ago.
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of us that have to get a life.
And even Foot Lockers, you know, which was Kinney before that. And you just start seeing these things slowly disappear. You know, it may just represent a changing landscape of running, but, you know, to discredit their value and their significance on the sport, you know, just it would be unfair. And really people should remember from whence they came. You know, just, you know, there's a lot of history back from that time period. And, you know, a lot of that's thanks to your efforts.
But you ask if it's a good thing or a bad thing. I can't think of anything bad that's come from it. And I think of an awful lot of good things. We were at the Olympic trials and a lawyer from Montana came up to me and they were talking about the demise of DyeStat and several people. And this guy says to the other people, pointing to me, he says, "This guy got my son a scholarship to Stanford," you know, because, you know, he was publicized and coming from a tiny town in Montana.
Yeah. Well, John, we appreciate all the work you've done over the years for the sport of track and field, and we really do hope to see DyeStat back up on the internet very soon. So thank you very much for joining us here on the Runaround, and I'm sure I'll see you somewhere at PG this winter.
All right. Thank you very much.
All right. Take care. So Ryan, what do you think, man?
Crazy. You know, it really is unfortunate because sites like that, and like you said, they didn't have competition back then, really. It was, the internet was for people who knew how to use it. And now anybody can have a site, and the sites like Let's Run, FlowTrack, Runner Space wouldn't exist today without sites like DieStat.
And we all owe Mr. Die a big grudge of gratitude. So coming up, we're going to be talking about the local athletes of the week, the high school athletes of the week, and a whole bunch of other stuff that might be interesting.